So today I'm be doing a book review of The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. I'm a really big Robert Greene fan, as you probably know, and the main reason is just because he's able to take a lot of these historical examples, whether from past events, leaders, or just other things that have occurred, and use them to explain, fundamental truths. And so in this case, for human nature, he presents a ton of different principles that, really represent the different kinds of people that we may encounter in our day to day. And he uses evidence to back them up of different situations in history or in the past when this actually was the case. So I'm going to be sharing some of my top takeaways from this. I'm not going to be going over every single principle, but I think I'm taking what the most important stuff out of it here is and the things that really resonate with me, and I'll be looking at my notes as usual. But he writes in a really, really great way. I think that's very actionable, easy to understand, but also builds on general concepts as well. So some of the first thing it talks about is just how to develop empathy and just read people and understand that people are more complex than we think they are. A lot of times we see someone and they present a certain side of themselves and we think, oh, this is the side that they truly are. But as we read this book, we realize it's actually not true. People are very complex. They have many different layers and they will present different faces to different people. So we shouldn't just take what we see at face value. And then from there, it starts to decode a lot of different levels of narcissism, right? Being obsessed with oneself. And it points out that we're all narcissistic to some degree. And this is really important because it's one of the few things that he's going to repeat again and again and again throughout these different laws. And he's like, we will read about examples where people will, let their pride get the best of themselves, be overly aggressive, be kind of, grandiose and thinking that they're so amazing. But he's like, all of us have these traits and characteristics within us. And the reality is we all have it. We cannot deny it. But the question is how much? And that's what he really, encourages us as readers to go beyond and really go deeper within ourselves for more self-reflection to understand how much of this, and be real with yourself. How much of this trait do I have? How much of this good trait? How much of this bad trait? And that way you can recognize in yourself and hopefully be able to change it. So, one of the key things that he talks about is also decision making. So we need to slow down when we make decisions because we need to realize in the moment we don't have enough perspective to always predict the consequences of our actions. One metaphor he uses that's really, really helpful is imagine climbing a mountain and you're at the base, which is like a thick forest, right? So inside the thick forest, you can't really see much. You climb higher and then realize what you thought before was wrong because your perspective changed. This is how time works over time because we're revealing things that can help us, right? So at the base of the forest, right, you can't see much because you're in the forest. But as you climb higher, you go above the forest, right? And you can see, let's say, the landscape a little bit. And once you reach the top of the mountain, it takes time to reach it. But once you see that, then you can see the entire land, right? And then you understand the truth of the situation. But so much of the time, in today's world, we make decisions way too fast. And we're making decisions when we're still in the forest and we haven't even reached the top. And as a result, we don't have enough information. We haven't really thought things through. And this leads us to make a lot of poor decisions. You have to be really careful of time pressure because it's often to make you think you need to do something now that you don't need to do. When you get caught up in the moment, you need to pull away and force yourself to think long term. This is exactly what, if you learn sales, they just try to do to you. They try to force you to make a decision as fast as possible. No, you can't wait 1 week to make this sale. You need to buy it now. Right? There's that time urgency. That's why they have sales. They have all these things where it's 50% off now, and you have to buy it now because otherwise you're going to miss out on the sale. And that leads us to make a lot of irrational decisions that you later regret. And so that's just one perfect example of that, right? Another great thing is just patience, right? Patience is a muscle you have to train. And, I'll say this, and some of you may understand it, some of you may not understand it. I think it's something I'm still trying to learn with, but it's you can only learn patience when you experience it, when you are forced to wait, when you realize how detrimental taking action too fast is, and then you'll be patient. Of course, this comes with a lot of caveats because sometimes you do have to take action in the moment. But the truth of the matter is, in today's world, people are just really bad at being patient with stuff. You go to the gym, you do want to work out, and you want to be ripped. But that's not how it works. It takes years. It took years for me, right, to develop a physique. And so that's just how life is. And the more patient you're willing to be, the more you're going to learn, the farther you're going to get ahead because most people just won't be willing to be patient. Most people are dying to talk about themselves, and if you give them the opportunity to do so, they'll give you wisdom, knowledge, and power. This was back when he was talking about Lyndon B. Johnson and how he rose to prominence in the US and eventually became president. He started off as a House of Representatives member and then into the Senate, but really his key was getting close to certain people. And the way he would do that is just notice what they felt was lacking. Maybe they weren't getting enough attention, or maybe they, didn't have anyone who's kind of looking up to them. And so he would give them that space to feel heard, respected, and just kind of, have like somebody there beside them. And that was enough for them to, be his ally and help him get to the top. Another really key strategy is you can use some sort of contact, like a hug, pat on the shoulder, right? Hand clasps. And this will subconsciously strengthen your connection with others without them knowing the source of your stronger connection. A big point that he makes is that, we all like to think we're amazing people, we're perfect, but all of us have a shadow, right? So everyone has a shadow of their character, which contains the repressed desires and socially unacceptable wishes. And the more you deny this shadow, the more you often see it just explode out in certain situations, right? And he makes this time and time again, but and I will say this later on, but the reason why history repeats itself, we always say, oh, history repeats, right? You look at the textbooks and you see World War One, and then you see World War Two, and who knows, maybe there'll be World War Three, right? And it's like, why does it repeat? It's not because there's some infinite time loop where we have to repeat. No, it's because of human nature. Human nature never changes. We act actually very similar to people hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. That's why I think this book is so important, because if you read it and understand these things, these are timeless truths that will not change. If you are 10 years old now and you grow until you're 90, these truths will stay with you, because there's something you will always have to deal with, in the sense you will always have to work with people. You always have to interact with others. And you'll see these patterns emerge over and over and over again. Okay, when people act in everyday society, they're putting on a show, and they're only showing the parts of themselves that are socially acceptable. The more they seem nice, the more they seem righteous, the more likely they hold a deeper inner secret desire that is exactly the opposite. So many of the times you see this bully, right? The bully's beating up kids at the school, right? The bully actually has this huge inferiority complex, right? Where he's inside, maybe he wasn't loved enough, and so he reverses this by acting all macho and attacking people and all this stuff, right? And so that's a good example of how sometimes the very opposite of what people project is what they do, right? Sometimes you'll have somebody who seems to follow all the rules, but then suddenly they'll just break one on their own in silence and try to hide it, right? So this is just going back to the idea that, people are more complex than we make them be. If you actually looked at yourself from an outside perspective, it would be pretty hard to probably judge, your next move. But the truth is, if you don't expect everything outside to be, really what this person wants or is thinking, then it starts to make more sense when they have certain unpredictable actions, because really what's happening is the repressed insides, their inner desires are coming out, and they're showing these flashes. So this will happen when people are very stressed out. And Robert Greene makes a great point. He says a lot of times in those situations, people will say, oh, sorry, I wasn't myself, or the lash out of anger. And then they'll take it back. I'm really sorry, I wasn't having a good day. But he says, he makes an argument, actually in that moment, they are their true selves. They just forgot to turn on the filter, and that's why they seem so different. And so if you see that, you should realize and remember that and recognize that this is who they are on the inside, and that you should take note of and use it as additional information. Another key point is don't let success get to your head, because it will change how you work and cause failure. So a lot of times to get to becoming successful, you have to work really hard. You have a lot of failures, you have to always constantly learn and make mistakes. But once you reach success, all of a sudden you think that you have this magical touch. But the truth is, you just, are seeing the fruits of your labor. And if you don't keep working, you won't keep seeing more success. But a lot of times people let it get to their head, and that's why they fall so suddenly as well. And yeah, so you must take risk and fail often to keep yourself humble. Close friends can oftentimes have a lot of envy towards you or others, so you need to be very careful and pay attention to the signs of envy that leak out over time. because envy is something that will lead those most close to you want to see your personal downfall. So a really interesting point he brings up is how to read micro expressions. So these are like the flashes of people's true nature on their faces that they show right before they repress it. So it's like, let's say somebody very close to you, and he says you can actually test it, right? Tell them some good news about yourself. Oh, I got a promotion, or this. You may see them like suddenly like just a furrow of a brow for a second, right? And then they'll be like, "Oh, that's amazing," or they might be like kind of like widen their eyes and then like just smile. So like those micro expressions right before they switch into the politically correct or the right response, that's actually what they're truly feeling, right? And he says the same thing too. Is like if you say something like terrible about yourself, or like, oh man, my car broke down, like I had to go like get it fixed or something, or oh, I got fired from my job, and then they suddenly seem like pretty interested or like pretty happy, and then they hide it and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry about that. That's a good sign that maybe they're very envious of you and they want to actually see you on your downfall. And the reason why a lot of times it ends up being your friends is because friends are close enough to see you, right? But I think if you've read another book that I really recommend, 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. It's amazing. But if you've read that book, you'll realize that friends are very dangerous in the sense that they're close enough to you to know a lot about you, but you've never actually established the boundaries of the relationship. And as such, a lot of times there can be favors that they think they should deserve from you and that you should give them, especially if you become successful, but in reality, they didn't actually help you do anything. So that's something you have to be very careful of. And also friends can become very ungrateful, even if you do give them things later on. But that just all comes down to how they're very big sources of envy that will affect you. And you have to, be on the lookout for that from the very beginning. Yeah, uncomfortable praise is also another sign of envy, right? So they congratulate your success, but they emphasize one aspect that you may not want highlighted, like saying, wow, you're very successful. I'm sure you have tons of money now. And you can see this comes off very passive aggressive kind of tone of voice. They're kind of like saying, wow, you're so successful. I'm sure you love the money, or I'm sure you love the attention. Like they're trying to make your success sound bad in a way, like you just did it for money or just for attention. Sometimes people who envy you may want to become your friend or draw closer to you in order to actually slowly torture and mess with you because they know they'll never be able to accomplish what you accomplish. This is something I'm starting to realize you have to be very careful about. Is like, if you are actually somebody who is destined for greatness and you work very hard and you always learn from your mistakes and you're doing all the right things, you have to watch out for snakes, because there's snakes out there who will just, want to leech off of you. And it's because they can't do it themselves, right? They would never actually be able to do any of the amazing things you're doing. And as a result, they just decide to try to leech off of you instead. And you have to stay as far away from those people as possible, right? It's better to be alone than to be with a leech. Yeah, so people who are envious often have nothing going on in their life, or they're very aimless, because otherwise they would spend that time working towards a goal or growing as a person. You will receive the most envy from people who are in a similar part of life as you, or in the same field as you. So the best way to avoid envy from others is to downplay your success and overemphasize luck to take away their ammunition for attacking you. So don't gloat, don't praise yourself too much when you do well, and try to be nice to most people, and this will prevent you from having too much envy directed at you. If you always gloat about it, people are just going to get really irritated with you, especially those who envy you a lot. And yeah, and then Robert Greene really highlights this. He says, if you feel somebody's envious towards you, he said, get as far away from them as possible, as soon as possible. Another way to short circuit envy, remove envy and any sources of it, is by placing the attention on others and deflecting it from yourself and asking others what they think and making others feel that spotlight. So if you share the spotlight with them, it can reduce envy a little bit. But again, it's just better if you get away from people who are super envious from you, because they're just going to be a leech that's just sucking away at you. Okay. Okay, to remove envy from yourself. So this is a different direction, right? So a lot of times we talk about envy from other people, but you got to realize you're envious too, right? I'm envious. Everybody's envious, right? And a lot of times it's just successful people, but there is a difference between envy and admiration. So envy is you'll never be able to get it, and that. And admiration is oh wow, I want to be like them one day, and you actually are working towards that. But to remove envy from yourself, realize that everything is not as good as it seems, right? Those who seem so rich and amazing and good looking do have very real struggles that people just conveniently forget about. Now, I'm not saying those struggles are necessarily bad. Like, they may be better than the struggles you have, because to be honest, your life is just full of struggles. But all I'm saying is that don't expect that just because they have money, just because they have this, they have no struggles or have, very few struggles. They just have different problems. But it doesn't mean their life sucks, but it's just like, don't think that their life is perfect. That's, I think, the key takeaway. Okay, so in group settings, right, we often act without thinking because the group takes control of us and we feel its power both inside and outside of us. This leads to generally poor decisions and a magnification of the emotions felt by the crowd. The group dynamic pulls us downwards towards our most primitive nature. So he brings up a lot of different examples of this. I mean, there's a lot of different situations where there's this like group fervor, and it's just like this buildup of intensity, and you really just feel it, right? And so this is where you have to be very careful, because what ends up happening is this like the mob mentality, where the mob of protesters, the mob of like terrorists, the mob of just, I don't know, like soldiers, they all of a sudden have this like groupthink moment where they're thinking like each other, which can be bad because all it takes is one leader to lead them in a different direction, and they just start tearing stuff apart, and they never actually detach themselves from the situation. This happens with people in cults, all these sorts of things, because what happens is when you're surrounded by so many people, there's this psychology experiment. They have 10 people in a room. 9 of them are like fake, as in they're like researchers, right? One's an actual like subject. The subject comes in and there's like a circle on the board and everybody keeps saying it's like a line, or it was maybe the other way around, something like that, right? So they're deliberately lying and like you can see it. What does the subject do? They agree with everybody else, even though they know it's completely not true. And so if you imagine, okay, in a low stakes situation where they're just lying about whether a shape is a certain shape, right? They agree in that situation. Well, then what about a high stakes situation where people could get like killed, or people could get like, kicked out or yelled at for like not being a part of the group? Of course they're going to conform, right? So this is something you have to notice, these patterns. It can be in work, it can be in school. You just notice how everybody conforms when they're in a group, and for better, for worse, right? The group can do terrible things and they'll conform. The group can do amazing things, they'll conform as well. Yeah, in group dynamics, we want to fit into whatever the norm is, even if it is fully wrong, and we know that. Most people will not stand up or stand out in a group. And by most people, I mean you probably wouldn't either, and I probably wouldn't either. So I think it's just very important to be aware of that and just be cautious of what's going on. So that way, like, you can hopefully pull away sometimes and think for yourself and don't get caught up too much in groupthink. There's a lot of other great stuff in the book that I'm not going to cover. It's just so many amazing things. As usual, I recommend you guys read it. Also, check out some of his other books. He has a really great way of just covering a lot of different things. So really highly recommend it. If you want a condensed version of this and the other books that I think are most essential for human nature, check out the link in my bio. It's going to be called The Charisma Code, and it's going to include this book, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and also the 48 Laws of Power. Okay. If you have any questions, put them down below. Otherwise, subscribe for more.